drugs, or ideas, what you consume influences who you become. On the Mind and Matter podcast, we learn together from the best scientists and thinkers alive today about how your mind-body reacts to what you feed it. Before starting Mind and Matter, I spent 10 years in academia doing scientific research. I got a PhD in neuroscience where I focused on neuroendocrinology and the neurobiology of behavior, and before that, I specialized in molecular, developmental, and evolutionary genetics. I use my scientific background to help parse and translate the information that guests share on the podcast. In addition to the podcast, I write long-form written content inspired by the show where I integrate what I've learned across episodes. I also have a free weekly newsletter where I provide you with upcoming guests, share links, and provide commentary on scientific studies and research that I'm reading, and more. Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content. The full version of this episode is available to paid subscribers at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. The full version is also freely available on my YouTube page. Just look up Mind and Matter or my name, Nick Jikomis, on YouTube, and you'll find the episode there. This is a partial version of the episode, and so it'll cut off partway through, but you'll still get a significant portion. So sign up to become a paid subscriber at Substack or visit my YouTube page to get the full episode. Netherlands, I think.
Yeah, Zoetermeer.
And can you start off by just telling everyone a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, so I'm Diana van Heemst, as you mentioned. I'm a biologist by training. I work at the Leiden University Medical Center in Leiden at the Department of Internal Medicine, section of gerontology and geriatrics. And my main research aim is on the neuroendocrine biology of aging and longevity in humans. So that's very...
Yeah, and you've written and done work about the thyroid before, and this is a very important part of the body and an important part of the endocrine regulation of the body, and one that I don't know that much about. It's just sort of an area of biology I haven't really gotten to yet in my own education. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk mostly about the thyroid across the lifespan and aging and longevity and things like this. I just want to start out very basic. What is the thyroid gland and where is it and what does it do?
Yeah, so the thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland. It's at the base of the neck, just, in front of the vocals, the larynx. And it arose in evolution probably at the time. So it's not present in invertebrate species, like insects or worms, but it is present in the vertebrate species. So the fish, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, and the amphibians. And it plays a very important role in metabolism, but also in growth and development and in transitions between different life stages.
Yeah, so it secretes hormones, it responds to hormones. One of the very simple basic questions I wanted to ask is, why is it in the throat? It sounds like maybe this is a pretty ancient organ. It's around in the common ancestor of all vertebrates, and it arose, probably hundreds of millions of years ago, I'm guessing. Yeah. And is it sort of like it's just a gland that secreted probably hormones in some ancient vertebrate, and that has something to do with why it's in the neck?
Yeah, so it has to do, for example, with we think it co-evolved with the evolution of the head, and it may have yielded some advantages to, let's say, the big fish predators, because it helps in the formation of jaws. So it's important in myelination, so that is the deposition of this insulating layer around neurons, and that actually has, since that exists, there's a much faster conduction of electrical signals in the nervous system. It probably is also implicated in the more complicated sensory organs like the eyes and the ears. So it's actually at the perfect location to kind of help orchestrate those processes. Yeah.
I see. So it probably has a lot of developmental functions across the body, but it's especially important for the development of different aspects of the head, including the nervous system, but also elsewhere in the body. So it almost sounds like maybe it's in a good, somewhat central location to be close to the head, but also close to elsewhere in the body.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, so it's basically it affects almost all cells and organs in the body. You're right. It's a very important ancient hormone. Yeah.
Interesting. So a lot of places we can go, but I want to sort of cover off on sort of the basic thyroid biology that's going to be true for most animals, the basic hormones, how they work, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I know that some of the hormones the thyroid is producing, these thyroid hormones, they are based or they use something called iodine and
Yeah.
iodide. What are these nutrients? Why are they important, and where do they come from?
Yeah. So it's actually the only hormone or the only hormone in the body that uses iodine. And it's important. So it basically the thyroid hormone itself, it's comprised of two derivatives of the amino acid tyrosine. And to each of these two tyrosine molecules, either two or one iodine molecule is attached. And so it's actually in that sense unique that this is the only, let's say, molecule in the body that contains iodine.
Hmm.
So iodine is really important for the production of thyroid hormone. And it is, there's actually still some iodine deficiency in parts of the world, which can give rise to problems with the thyroid glands. And it's present naturally. I guess, one of the most reliable natural sources would be anything that comes from the sea, so seafood, but also marine fish, but also shell food like shrimps. So those are really rich in iodine, and in a lot of countries it is actually added to table salt.
Hmm.
So
Oh yeah.
in a big part of the world, iodine deficiency, which used to be quite common. And so, especially in regions that were not people that were not living close to the sea, for example, in
Yeah.
the mountains, there was a lot of, it could happen that people had endemic forms of hypothyroidism,
Hmm.
which was much less prevalent in areas where there was much more seafood on the diet. However, nowadays, it's especially added, for example, to table salt and also to a lot of food products that contain salt. For example, to bread in the Netherlands, it's being added. So, well, despite that, that legislation is not true for all the parts of Europe, for example. So there's still some regions in Europe that are mildly iodine deficient.
Hmm. So a lot of ways we can go with this. So okay, iodine. What kind of molecule is it?
Yeah, it's a very heavy, it has quite a high atomic weight.
Okay.
Um, and it's actually, it's like I said, the only molecule of which we know in which it is incorporated actually in our body is indeed the thyroid hormones. Yeah,
Interesting. So
yeah,
it's very prevalent in seafood. It sounds like you get it in lots of
yes,
fish and
exactly.
other marine life,
Yeah,
shrimp, as you mentioned. I've even seen someone once sold me at the store these like pickled seaweed things, and the selling
yeah,
point was that it was high in iodine. So we
yeah,
find this a lot in the ocean. If you don't have enough iodine, you become hypothyroid. So the thyroid is not functioning enough, and we'll talk about what that means. And historically, a lot of people were thyroid deficient, but that's much less common today, in large part because we put it in the salt and things like that.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now, I don't know if this is a tangent worth going down, but when I just think about human history and human evolution, if thyroid is so important, if the thyroid gland is pretty ancient, it's found in all vertebrates, and it's found primarily the nutrient needed to for thyroid function is found primarily in seafood. There's a lot of people around the world who come from traditions where they didn't have a lot of seafood, they didn't live close to the ocean, but it's hard to believe that these people would have all been thyroid deficient for evolutionary history. How do we think about that?
yeah. No, so that's true. So it's not, of course, only in seafood. So it's also
Mm-hmm.
in dairy, for example. So
Mm.
cheese, and especially, you can also imagine it can even be in the soil for some extent. So some
Mm-hmm.
plants may actually contain iodine. So it's most prevalent in seafood, as we mentioned, but that's not the only source. You're right in that. Yeah.
I see. So it's very prevalent in seafood. It's also
Yes.
prevalent in dairy products like cheese. In
Cheese. Yeah.
general, do you find it mostly in animal-based foods as opposed to plant-based foods?
Yeah, although of course, again, it can also be present in plants, especially if they have been cultured in soil that's, close to the sea, for example. And you also already mentioned the wheat. So it's not only animal food, but it's most prevalent indeed in seafood, dairy products like cheese.
I see. And so, getting to the actual thyroid biology here. So iodine is a key molecule to make some of these thyroid hormones.
Yes.
Can you give us just a crash course in very basic terms for how the thyroid gland works? What are these thyroid hormones? What are they called? And what are their most basic functions?
Yeah, okay. So the thyroid hormones, the ones that is most prevalent in the blood is called T4. That's it's also called tetraiodothyronine. So it contains 4 iodine molecules. So that's why it's called T4. And there's another one which is actually considered the more biologically active thyroid hormone, which is called T3, and that contains 3 iodine molecules. So that's 3-iodothyronine. And the way they are formed basically is that, so inside the thyroid gland, there's a protein which is being made, which contains a lot of these tyrosine molecules, that amino acids. And then iodide is actually incorporated into the thyroid gland. It's being activated into iodine that would then react with those tyrosine molecules. And then ultimately there's an enzyme which takes care of that reaction. And each tyrosine molecule then contains either 1 or 2 of those iodine molecules. And then 2 of the tyrosines are joined. So if the one contains 2 iodine molecules and the other one, you would get T3. And if you have one that contains 2 iodine molecules and the other one also contains 2 iodine molecules, you would get T4. And then they are actually cleaved from this thyroglobulin scaffold and being secreted into the circulation.
Mm-hmm. So I see. So basically, it's like iodine is combining with some other stuff. The number of iodines you get determine if you got T3 or T4, and that nomenclature just refers to the number of iodine molecules.
Exactly. Yeah.
And basically, the T3, the one with 1 less iodine, that's the active version of T4.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, okay, so what what is T3, the active version? What does it actually do? What are some of its most common functions?
Yeah, so it's like you already mentioned, it has a wide array of functions in the body, and we know a lot from what it does, because if we have too little of it, in the case of hypothyroidism, where you have an underactive thyroid gland, you have diseases where people have too much of it, hyperthyroidism, where the thyroid gland is too active. And so it is really important for metabolism. So if you have too much of it, your metabolism is accelerated. So you can produce a lot of heat and you actually lose a lot of weight because you burn actually too much more calories than is needed for that given situation. Well, if you have too little of it, you actually, you're very cold sensitive and you actually put on weight easily because you're not burning enough calories to meet the challenges ahead. So that's one part. But there's also effects on the heart, for example. And again, in the case of having too much thyroid hormone, the heart rate is accelerated, so the heart is beating too fast or irregular, while in the case of too little thyroid hormone, there's actually a too slow heart rate. And the same can be also said for thought processes. So if you have too little thyroid hormone, you can become a slow thinker. That people complain about mind fogs. While if you have too much of it, you can become very nervous and agitated. And the same is actually true for bowel movements. Having too much could lead to diarrhea. In the case of hyperthyroidism, while having too little could lead to constipation. The same with perspiration, right? If you have too much, you get a very, you transpire a lot, not enough, you will get a very dry skin. So, it actually affects a lot of organs and tissues in the body.
So it has a sort of a general purpose effect on metabolism, and it sounds like things are pretty intuitive. Hypothyroid, low thyroid, that means slow metabolism. The things you might imagine would come with that. Hyperthyroid is a lot or fast metabolism, a lot of thyroid. Your heart will beat faster, you'll lose weight, you'll make more heat. It sort of goes with what you would expect based on high versus low metabolism.
Exactly. Now that's exactly correct. Yeah.
Interesting. And so again, there's a lot of ways we can go with this. But can you get into a little bit more detail on how the thyroid hormone itself, the active version T3, how is it actually modulating things like metabolic rate? How is it actually turning the knob here to turn metabolism up or down?
Yeah, so it is actually, so maybe it's good to mention that we have two ways in which thyroid hormone availability can be regulated. So the
Hmm.
first is to actually, there's certain mechanisms which regulate how much thyroid hormone is available in the blood. And that's called the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. And that's, let's say, a classic endocrine feed forward and feedback loop. And that basically determines about approximately how much of the mainly the T4 we have in our blood. And
Hmm.
then that's being distributed to the different cells, tissues, and organs in the body via the bloodstream.
I see. So
And
T4 is like it's like the full potential amount of thyroid you have, but then it also has to be activated after that.
exactly. And so we have a part of it which is already in the active form, but the majority is actually in this prohormone form, T4. And then there's a couple of steps that lead to the activation of to thyroid hormone availability inside the cells. And that has to do with a lot of specific components that can be expressed by certain cells. So first, the thyroid hormone has to be taken up by thyroid hormone transported. So that facilitates the entry of the thyroid hormone from the bloodstream into the cells.
Hmm.
And then inside those cells, it can become activated by so-called deiodonases. And those are enzymes that can actually take away one of those four iodines from the T4 and then convert it into T3, for example. But they could also inactivate the thyroid hormone under certain circumstances. Well, then the T3, which is formed inside the cell, is then translocated to the cell nucleus. And then it can bind to the thyroid hormone receptor. And the thyroid hormone receptor is actually a member of the so-called nuclear hormone receptors, which is a huge family of basically they are transcription factors. So they
Yeah,
actually works by modulating transcription or gene expression. So that's basically why it can have such a wide variety of effects because
I see.
it binds when it binds to the thyroid hormone receptor. It can actually
Yeah,
induce transcriptional changes.
I see. So, and I would imagine that in the case of the thyroid hormone, the active version T3 and the receptor, the nuclear receptor, this transcription factor is probably modulating the activity of genes that are tied to metabolism.
Exactly. So, for example, we know that when it is cold, we need much more. We need to do much more to produce heat. So that's
Hmm.
called thermogenesis. And one of the important genes is the uncoupling protein 1.
Mm.
So that's actually under the direct control of thyroid hormone. So it is actually directly regulating a lot of genes that are implicated in various aspects of metabolism. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it sounds like there's some general principles that are worth mentioning here for people. So if I'm hearing you right, so thyroid is sort of regulated, the active amount of thyroid is regulated on multiple levels in a way that's akin to how other hormones are regulated. So you make some amount of thyroid in the form of T4 initially, and the amount you have is the amount you have. It might be high, it might be low, it might be somewhere in the
Yeah.
middle. But then there's an additional layer of regulation on top of that, which is it needs to be activated in order to actually get into cells to affect transcription, and in this case, modulate genes that are going to be involved in metabolism. And so I guess there's an analogy with how other hormones work to some extent. So, for
Yeah.
example,
That's,
testosterone, there's a free
yeah.
and a bound version,
Yeah.
and there's regulation in terms of how much you produce, but also how much of it is free versus bound. It's similar in
Cortisol
this
is the
case?
same. Yes, it's similar for other hormones. So that's indeed, so that allows the body actually to have this reservoir of hormone from which to take at need, but then also it allows for very specific regulation of the actual availability of the hormone within cells at given times, given places. So it's all about having the right amount of the right hormone at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, yeah. It's Yeah, so yeah, that is like a good way to think about it, I guess. It's you can have a huge surplus. You can always make sure you have enough potential
Exactly.
hormone there, and then you can just sort of tweak how much of it is activated to get exactly what you need for the circumstances you're in. if everything's working right. But I suppose the flip side of that is we've got now multiple layers or multiple levels at which things could start to break down. So
Yeah,
someone
that's
might not
exactly.
produce enough T4, they might not activate into enough T3, and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
so when we think about hypothyroid, what exactly is that, and what starts to cause that?
Yeah, so it's hyperthyroid. So if you look at the disease in humans, it's actually an autoimmune disease.
Hmm.
And yeah, there are various forms of hyperthyroidism, but the most common form is an autoimmune disease where actually, so normally, if you look at the normal regulation, we already discussed it a bit, we have this region in the brain where lots of signals from the environment are being integrated, and it's called the hypothalamus,
Yeah.
right? And then in the hypothalamus, TRH is being made, which then stimulates the pituitary gland, which is also located in the brain, to secrete TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and that stimulates the thyroid gland to work harder and to produce more thyroid hormones. Um, so normally, the production of thyroid hormone from the thyroid gland is under the control of TSH, which is being produced, depending on the needs, because there's a very sophisticated system.
Yeah.
Because if we have too much thyroid hormones, those thyroid hormones can actually directly downregulate TRH and TSH, so there's negative feedback. And then, there is actually no longer this feed-forward drive, right?
Yeah.
But if there's not enough, then the brake, let's say the inhibition on TRH and TSH is removed. And then again, there's the feed-forward drive, which would then stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones. So that would be, the normal physiological regulation. But under certain circumstances, our body can make, what is called autoantibodies. For example, antibodies that start stimulating the thyroid gland and that can bind to the TSH receptors, even if TSH is not present,
Hmm.
and then actually stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones independent of TSH.
Oh, wow.
So it starts making much more thyroid hormones than is actually needed under that given situation, and that can lead to toxicity due to excess of thyroid hormone, which is called thyrotoxicosis.
Hmm. And so so hypothyroid, hyperthyroid. So, oh, actually, before we get there, so what you just said is basically thyroid levels, sort of the logic of the whole neuroendocrine circuit here follows something that's very common in biology, which is there's negative feedback loops built in here. When thyroid levels get too high, it's kind of like a thermostat. The temperature goes up and then tells the mechanism to turn things down, and vice versa. But of course, the mechanism can break down, and then you can get too much or too little. What Well, let's start actually more like on the epidemiological side. What's more common today in modern people, hypothyroid or hyperthyroid? Are there any interesting patterns there?
Yeah, so hypothyroidism is more common than hyperthyroidism. Yeah. And with hypothyroidism, it's a bit, the most prevalent form again is an autoimmune disease.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we already discussed a bit previously how thyroid hormone is being produced. And there's several steps in which iodine is converted to iodide, and then the iodine molecules are, built in those tyrosine molecules, and those are all performed by an enzyme which is called thyroid peroxidase. And in this case, the body makes autoantibodies against that enzyme, so against TPO. It's abbreviated, and that again, can lead to an attack basically, so that affects the thyroid hormone producing capacity of the thyroid gland. And so if you look at the data, hypothyroidism is more prevalent than hypothyroidism.
Mm-hmm.
And it can actually reach quite high numbers, especially in older people. Yeah.
I see. So as it's common in older people, more common, and so is the idea here that just as you go throughout life, every day that goes by, you've got some chance that the autoimmune thing could kick in, the immune system starts to recognize something it shouldn't, and then you get hypothyroid.
Yeah, so to some extent, when we get older, there's more debris exposed, which may elicit unwanted immune reactions. Our immune system ages. There's something which is called immunosenescence. The
Yeah.
discrimination between self and non-self is kind of, not as clear anymore as when we were younger. So there are certain things that go down the hill, so to say, when we grow older. And of course, I think the peak incidence. So the first diagnosis of hypothyroidism is probably around people in their 50s. But yeah, people can, you can substitute it with synthetic thyroid hormone. So the older people get and the older the population gets, the higher the prevalence is of a lot of these diseases.
Hmm.
And yeah, some people can get it also, of course, in later ages. And when people get older, what we call the symptoms and signs of hyperthyroidism and hyperthyroidism may not be as obvious as they were in younger people. So it may
Hmm.
sometimes also go unnoticed or actually be detected at a much later stage.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
hypothyroidism, it can be autoimmune in origin. It sounds like that's one of the
Yeah.
more common causes here. And you see that more on average in older individuals than younger. What about are there any environmental or dietary causes to either hyperthyroidism? For example, can a younger person have a dysfunctional thyroid because they're not getting, well, I would imagine if you're not getting iodine, but when we think about on a higher level, are there certain diets that promote one or the other, or certain other environmental factors that come into this?
Yeah, well, of course, there's a lot of discussion nowadays about endocrine disrupting
Yeah.
chemicals. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of chemicals in the environment that are not yet all tested for the endocrine disrupting features. And of course, the thyroid system, which is already very complicated at various levels. You already mentioned there's various levels where it could go wrong. That's very sensitive to endocrine disruption. And and a lot of the chemicals that we use today, not all of them have been tested, so to say. So there are things like pesticides, flame retardants, food additives. And there are some people who, there
Yeah.
are some associations with. There's actually, an increasing incidence of hypothyroidism, and there are researchers who link that potentially to the increased exposure that we have to those chemicals that may have endocrine disrupting features. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that there's a lot of these endocrine disruptors out there. Not all of them have been, most of them have not been fully characterized. Some of them haven't even been characterized at all. I would imagine, though, if I had to bet, and you can tell me if this is wrong or we know anything here in particular, but if I had to bet, I would say there's probably more risk that these things we're exposed to cause hypothyroidism, because that would favor slower metabolism, fat gain, weight gain, and that's, in general the trend that we see in the population overall. Is there, do we think that these environmental toxins and things probably are tipping the scales on average in favor of
Yes,
hypothyroidism?
I would agree with that because, I think, if there's a lot of ways in which, the system can be disturbed. So you can actually inhibit, for example, sufficient uptake of iodine by the thyroid gland, which is essential for the production of thyroid hormones, as we have discussed. There can be certain chemicals which may actually inhibit this activation step. So they may inhibit these diodonases. There's so many different, components involved in this very precise regulation of thyroid hormone action that it is indeed vulnerable to endocrine disruption. And it's most likely then that, that there's less of it.
Mm-hmm. And,
Yeah.
I would imagine that thyroid hormone, like other hormones, these things, as you mentioned before, the active version of T3 gets into cells. It binds to an intracellular receptor that acts as a transcription factor to regulate gene expression. That's part of what that function is part of why hormones are so powerful at orchestrating coordinated changes in multiple tissues
Exactly.
throughout the body, because
Yeah.
they're having that sort of what you might call deep effect inside of cells in terms of what they're expressing and what they're doing. Is thyroid hormone important for major developmental transitions, like say the onset and offset of puberty?
Yeah, it is, well, actually, we know one example from biology, which is that it is really important for the transition from a tadpole to a frog. So for the
Mm.
amphibian metamorphosis, which is dependent, yeah, not only also on cortisol, but also on thyroid hormone. So if you lack thyroid hormone, that transition cannot happen.
Oh, so a
And
tadpole needs thyroid hormone to turn into a frog.
exactly, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah,
And so, okay, so it's important in other animals for these major metamorphoses, and I would imagine it's also involved to some
yeah.
extent in human, say, sexual maturity.
Yeah, no, exactly. And also, for example, right after birth, we see an increase in thyroid hormone
Hmm.
because there's this then the fetus, of course, is via the placenta connected to the bloodstream of the mother, but after birth and once the umbilical cord is no longer intact, of course, there should be independent breathing. Um, there should be actually the activation of brown adipose tissue to produce sufficient heat and to maintain
Mm.
core body temperature independently from the mother. So there's actually just after birth, which is actually the first transition that we have, we see that there's actually a huge increase in thyroid hormone in
Ah.
humans.
So, oh
And
wow. So in essence, it sounds like there's a burst of thyroid hormone right after birth in humans that
yeah,
essentially is involved in sort of activating system, making the baby a little bit more independent and generate
exactly.
its own
So
heat and
because
stuff.
we start
Yeah,
breathing, so there's
yeah,
much more oxygen available, and there's actually a combustion of oxygen to
yeah.
produce heat and to maintain body temperature. Because especially of course in newborns, they have a lot of brown adipose tissue, and probably also induced by the cold. Exposure to cold, which is different from the intrauterine environment. That's probably a trigger that leads to this increase in thyroid hormone. And it's probably important for survival to be able, right after
Yeah.
birth to not, to maintain proper body temperature.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what about like other developmental transitions? Is there anything? So you sort of mentioned longevity indirectly before. We know that hypothyroidism starts to become more common as one ages. There can be an autoimmune thing that happens as you age. It's important for just after birth. It's important for development, generally speaking, as many other hormones are. Is there anything specific? I'm not thinking of anything here. I'm just asking off the cuff because I
Yeah, yeah,
really have
yeah.
no idea. Are there any other major sort of super important components of development that thyroid is particularly involved in?
Yeah, so we in general you could think that the amount of thyroid hormone that we have available and that we made is really there to support development. So, for example, if you don't have, so we already discussed that. You can become hypothyroid later on in life due to this autoimmune disease. But there's also, of course, examples of babies who are born with hypothyroidism, which is called
Mhm.
congenital hypothyroidism. And nowadays we take a drop of blood from the heel to actually check for that condition, because
Yeah,
once we do that already, let's say in the first week of life, we can still supplement the thyroid hormone in time, and then prevent all the problems that would occur if it would not be diagnosed at an early stage and being treated. And
yeah,
so in the old days, before that neonatal screening program, it sometimes was discovered much too late. And then you can get what was called cretinism. So those were babies who were really hypothyroid and had not had enough thyroid hormone in that first months or years of life, and they
yeah,
had severe intellectual disabilities, severe
yeah,
neurodevelopmental problems, but also problems with the musculoskeletal system.
yeah,
So it is really important for full development. So it's
yeah,
actually, we know a lot about thyroid hormone because of the things it does with metabolism.
yeah,
But, another very important role is actually those developmental aspects.
yeah.
And like in the fetus, diabetes, I guess, at the end, just before birth, thyroid hormone levels are already a little bit increasing to help in the maturation of certain organs. Then there's the transition to birth. And then, of course, we need sufficient amounts of thyroid hormone during that whole process where we actually grow to our full potential.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, again, if we just think of thyroid as being, a knob for how fast metabolism is happening, it sounds like these early waves, these spikes in thyroid, right after birth and things, they're helping sort of get the whole system rolling at the right speed. And if you don't do that, things are happening too slowly and you just don't develop enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. So let's say, let's say you're a normal person, a normal adult, young adult even, and you don't have a congenital thyroid issue, you don't have autoimmunity. Let's say that you're not getting enough iodine in your diet, or you have got some problem with your diet, some problem with your lifestyle that's starting to make you somewhat hypothyroid. What would the symptoms look like? How would someone maybe notice that was happening?
Yeah, so if you start to become hypothyroid, I guess the most common complaint is that people really feel tired. So it's basically like you're not burning enough calories to actually do all the things you need to do in daily life. So you don't have enough energy. So that would be, especially in the morning, you would feel sluggish. You would feel maybe a bit depressed, low mood.
Can you move slightly closer? You just got quieter.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So there's you don't transpire enough, so your skin may become dry. You may suffer from some irregular bowel movements, constipation.
Everything is just kind of slow.
Yeah, so it's kind of
low energy and slow
down. Yeah, exactly. So those are, of course, the difficulty is that those are actually quite common signs also of other diseases. So it's not. Right. They are not really very specific. So, but there are those signs and symptoms, and and they may be caused partly also by the underlying inflammatory autoimmune process, but also, of course, by the lack of thyroid hormone itself.
Yeah. And what do you do in those cases? So if you're hypothyroid, say, is it easy to supplement with thyroid? Is that something that you can take that you get from a doctor, or how do you actually treat something? Full version of this episode is available to paid subscribers at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. The full version is also freely available on my YouTube page. Just look up Mind and Matter or my name, Nick Jikomis, on YouTube, and you'll find the episode there. This is a partial version of the episode, and so it'll cut off partway through, but you'll still get a significant portion. So sign up to become a paid subscriber at Substack or visit my YouTube page to get the full episode. Hey everyone, I want to take just a minute to tell you about a really cool health monitoring device I've been using called Lumen. It's a handheld, pocket-sized device with a sleek design. The Lumen device measures CO2 levels in your breath, which allows their technology to determine the extent to which your body is burning fats versus carbohydrates. Lumen helps improve your metabolic flexibility, your body's efficiency in shifting between using fats and carbs for energy. I use this device in the morning, or before bed, or after meals, or after workouts to track my metabolism. With just a couple weeks of use, I learned a lot about which foods were causing my body to burn mostly fat, mostly carbs, or both, as well as how long I needed to fast and how hard I needed to exercise to promote fat burning. Being able to track whether your body is burning fat versus carbs will help you figure out how your body responds to your lifestyle and whether or not your weight loss and fitness strategies are actually working. Lumen is great for anyone looking to optimize their health for either weight loss or athletic performance. Their easy-to-use app allows you to track your results together with what you're eating and how you're exercising, and it syncs with other devices like the Apple Watch. Click the link in the episode description to learn more and use the code MINDMATTER, MINDMATTER, to get 10% off your Lumen device today. That's on top of the site-wide sale they are currently running, and the Lumen device is eligible to be paid for with FSA and HSA health accounts. Check out the link in the episode description for more info.